Good afternoon. I had a few questions on Module 2, integers, and some of the homework problems. So I want to work out a few of the problems. Make sure that you have studied the rules for addition and for subtraction. Multiplication and division's a little bit easier, but make sure that you've studied all the rules before you start working on these word problems and on the combo problems. So let's go ahead and scroll down here to the first set of questions. My question number 1 says evaluate the expression -5 minus -12 minus 8. So if I did that, I would have -5 minus -12 minus 8. The first thing I would do is I would change all of the subtraction signs to addition and use the rule for subtraction, which is called plus the opposite. So the first term is -5. The second term is minus a -12, so I would change that to plus a positive because that's plus the opposite. That means that those are equivalent. And then I would also do the same rule for the last term, which is minus 8. I would do plus a -8. You're going to go plus the opposite of the sign in the term. So now my problem looks like -5 plus a positive 12 plus a -8. The next strategy I would use is I would take -5 and -8 and add those together. So that gives me -13 that I'm going to add to positive 12. Now, the rule for adding a positive and a negative is to take the difference between the two numbers, the 13 and the 12, and that gives me 1. And the sign is going to be whichever is furthest from 0. And the -13 is further away from 0 than 12, so I'm going to have an answer of -1. So I would type -1 here. On problem 2, this is just a test about a little quiz about your knowledge of the rules. It says that the sum, which means addition expression, of 0 and a negative number is always a negative number. Well, yeah, that's true. 0 plus any number is that number. And if your number is always negative, then the answer is going to be negative. So that answer is true. Now, question number 3 I have. The sum of a positive number and a negative number is always a positive number. That's not true. It depends on which number is further away from 0. So when I have a positive number and a negative number and I'm adding them together, what I truly do is ignore the signs initially, take the difference between the two numbers, and then I determine the sign by whichever one of the numbers is further from 0. So sometimes the answer is positive and sometimes the answer is negative. So I need to put a false on that because that is not always true. It really depends on which one is larger or further away from 0. Let me say, not necessarily larger, but further from 0. Okay, question 4. For me, this is a word problem. Marcia owns a coffee shop. On Tuesday, she made a loss of $45, and on Wednesday, a loss of $30. On Thursday, she made a profit of $29, and on Friday, a profit of $72. How much did she earn in profit? So let's see. She had -45 That's what she started out with. And then she had another loss of 30. So that's a total loss of 75 because you have to add those two negative numbers together. So on Thursday, she had a profit of 29. So that's plus 29. And on Friday, she had a profit of 72. So that's a plus 72. So if I take those two pluses here, I get, let's see, 11, 10, 11. Okay, that's 101 minus 75, which gives me 26, right? And the 26 is going to be a positive 26 because she started out with a negative 75, then you have to add 29 to that, and then 72 to that. So I just added the 72 and the 29, which is 101, and then I just subtracted the 75 because I did the positive number total, and then I did the negative numbers total, and the difference is a positive 26. So I see that that is a choice there. Positive 26. Sometimes when I have these problems and I write the problem out, one of the strategies that I like to use is combining, especially if it's adding or subtracting, is combining the signs and then taking the difference. That way I don't have to take the difference so many times. So on question number 5, the table shows the scores of Andy and Thomas playing a series of board games. It looks like they played 3 games. Who had the higher total? So let's look at Andy's score. Andy had a negative 10, but then in game 2 and 3, Andy gained 9. So the difference there is a negative 8. I'm sorry, negative 1. You got a negative 10 plus a positive 9. That's a negative 1. That's what Andy had. And then Thomas had a negative 3 and then a 2 and an 8. So when I add the 2 and 8, I get 10. 10 and 3. When I subtract it, I get 7. And that 7 is positive. So it looks to me like Thomas is the winner. So I would put Thomas because he's got the higher score when you take the positives and negatives into account. Okay, on question number 6, we have 8 to the second power. Then we're going to add a negative 14 divided by 2, and then we're going to subtract a negative 16. So let me write that out real quick. 8 squared plus negative 14 divided by 2 minus negative 16. So the first thing I would do is I would just go ahead and do plus the opposite for the negative 2 right after, right after the 2 I would put a plus, so I wouldn't have a negative there. And then it'll be plus the opposite, which is plus a positive 16. So I would use that rule for subtraction of negative numbers and positive numbers. Now, in the order of operations, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, I need to do any parentheses first. Well, when I look at the parentheses, it's just the whole number it's just the integer negative 14. So there's nothing else combined in the parentheses. And then I have in the other parentheses a positive 16. So I'm not going to do anything to those because they're just single digits. Now, the next thing after you look at the parentheses is you're supposed to do any exponents or roots from left to right. So from left to right, I have 8 squared. That's a power. So that's got an exponent. So 8 times 8 is 64. So I need to write 64 plus a negative 14 divided by 2 plus 16. Now the next step I'm going to do is reading from left to right in the order of operations. I need to do any multiplication and division that I encounter. So from left to right, I have a negative 14 divided by 2, which is negative 7 there in the middle. So now I have 64 plus -7 plus 16. And then after that, I'm going to just go from left to right. What I'm going to do is just take 64 plus 16, because those are both positive, and I get 80. And then I'm going to subtract 7, because if I take the difference between positive 80 and -7, I'm going to get 73. And it's 73 positive. So I would select 73 here. And let's do maybe 2 more, because I think you have a total of 16 here. Well, both of these are very similar. Let's do the one with the square root in it. Let's do number 8. Simplify -6 times, that little dot means times, 8. And you subtract, in parentheses, 4 squared plus 2 plus the cube root of 1728 divided by -4. Let's do that one. I gotta write it down. So we want to simplify this down as low as we can go. Cube root of 1728 divided by -4. Okay. So reading from left to right, I have to go into the parentheses first. So I'm going to just write -6 times 8, and then minus, and then inside of this parentheses, I have 4 to the second power, which is basically 4 times 4. So that's 16 plus 2. And that's the only parentheses I have. So now I'm going to do 16 plus 2, which is 18. And I have 18. So I've got -6 times 8 minus 18, because that's what everything turns out to be within the parentheses, plus the cube root of 1728 divided by 4. Then the next step I'm going to do when I'm going from left to right is I need to do the root, the root of 1728, and I believe that's 12. 12 times 12 times 12 is 1728. Or you can put it in your calculator if it does cube roots. So now I've got -6 times 8 minus 18 plus 12 divided by 4. Now the next step I have to do is any multiplication or division that is going to be done in order from left to right. So the first one I see is the -6 times 8. So that's -48 minus 18 plus, then I've got 12 divided by 4, and that's 3. Now, what I could do, now that I've gotten it simplified to -48 minus 18 plus 3, I can go ahead and combine the two negatives. So -48 plus a -18, that's going to give me 16, carry the 1, 6, okay? And then, is that 12 negative? Yeah, because the 4 is -4. Okay, and then I've got -3 here. So -66 minus 3, I get a -69. Because when you're adding two negatives together, the number still stays negative. So the answer is -69. Okay, let's do this temperature one. This will be the last one that I do. I think we already did a money one. So on this temperature one, we have, it was, oops, I don't know if that answer's right. I'll have to change it. It was a very freaky weather day. The temperature started out at 9 degrees Celsius in the morning and went into a -13 degrees Celsius at noon. It stayed at that temperature for 6 hours and rose 7 degrees. How far below the freezing point, which is 0 degrees Celsius, was the temperature at 6 p.m.? So let's start out at 9 degrees Celsius, which is positive. So you're positive 9 degrees. And then you went to negative 13 degrees. So if you were on a thermometer, 9, the difference between 9 and negative 13 is going to be, let's see, 9 is 12, 22. That difference is going to be 22. Okay, now, so it stayed that way until noon. Okay. And then at that temperature for 6 hours, it rose 7 degrees. So you went up 6. And, oh, it said, did it go? Oh, no, it rose up to 7 degrees. Okay? So how far below the freezing point was the temperature? All right, so let me put this on a number line. That'll help me visually. So I'm 9 degrees here. And it went down to negative 13 degrees. Here's 0. And for 6 hours, it rose up to 7, so that would be actually just negative 6 degrees. It only went up 7. And so how far below the freezing point? It's 6 degrees. I luckily clicked on 6. So it should be 6 degrees to below 0. It would be like a negative 6 if you were to actually do the math here. So, and the question is asking, what is it below already? So you don't have to put a negative in front of it. You already know that it's down below 0, 6 degrees. And I'm hoping that that'll be enough. Let me look at some of the, there's a couple of questions where, like on number 15, you have to evaluate one side of the equation and compare it to the other side of the equation. So let's just do this very last one on question. My question number 15 says 8 times a negative 2 minus negative 4 squared. So let's do that one just to see what that becomes. Minus negative 4 squared. So this will give me negative 16 minus 16, which is a negative 32. And then on the other side of the equation that I'm going to compare it to, because I have to use either greater than, less than, or equal to, I have 39 divided by 9 plus 2 times 5. Oh, I'm sorry, 34. 34 divided by 9 plus 2 times 5. So 9 goes into 34. That's not going to come out pretty number. Okay, 3 is 27, 4 is 36, so it's going to be a 3. And then you get 7 here. So I'm getting 3 and 7/9. And then I have to do the 2 times 5 first, plus 10. So I'm getting 13 and 7/9 on that side. So negative 32 compared to the mixed number 13 and 7/9, which is positive, is going to be, when you read from left to right, negative 32 is less than, so you need to put a less than symbol here. It's going to be less than 13 7/9. So when I think there's one more question like that, which is up above. My question 14 is very similar. So what you'll do is you'll just do the first part and compare it to the second part, and then you have to use the symbol in between, either greater than, less than, or equal to is the symbol that you'll type. Okay, now if you have any more questions, let me know, but that should get you started on the homework. And don't forget, you still have to do the integer review, which is more practice before you take the test. Always email me and let me know if you need anything. Thanks a lot.